See for yourself the candidates and the debates from key House and Senate races. Make C-SPAN your primary source for campaign 2018. Republican Congressman Lou Barletta is challenging Democratic Senator Bob Casey in Pennsylvania. They debated over the weekend in Philadelphia. This is An Hour.
Welcome to Vote 2018, the Pennsylvania senatorial debate. Today's debate is brought to you by WPVI-TV 6ABC and Univision 65. And now, in alphabetical order, the candidates: Republican Congressman Lou Barletta and Democrat Senator Bob Casey. The panelists for this debate will be 6ABC anchor Shari Williams and Univision anchor Ilya Garcia. This debate will be moderated by 6ABC anchor Jim Gardner.
Welcome to the first debate between the major party candidates for U.S. Senate in Pennsylvania. Of course, we are quickly approaching the general election that will help to shape the Commonwealth's political landscape for the next 6 years and beyond. In the next hour, we will question the candidates to learn more about where they stand on issues of great importance to you, the voter. Both candidates will have 1 minute to answer each question. A drawing determined that Congressman Barletta will answer the opening question. Senator Casey will give the final closing statement. So let's begin. Mr. Barletta, it is a huge story. The news is actually breaking all around us. The Saudis now concede that journalist Jamal Khashoggi is dead, but they say he died in a fist fight. No mention of beheading or dismemberment or bone saws. It looks like the explanation may be intended to protect Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman from any culpability. Of course, the Trump administration has both a strategic and financial relationship with MBS. What should the response of this country and the Senate be?
Well, I think, first of all, we need to get to the bottom of it. The Saudis have now given a number of different stories as to what happened. 18 Saudis who went in, and they said it was a fist fight gone bad. So I think the most important thing is that we get to the bottom of it. Obviously, the Saudis have been an ally with us, not only militarily, but economically and financially. However, there's no way the United States could condone anything like this. And when the final investigation comes through, we'll see what the administration chooses to do as a response. I think it needs to be something that is obviously compares to the horrible thing that appears to have happened there.
Mr. Case.
Jim, what has to happen here, I think, is presidential leadership has to be brought to bear. The president should be very clear. We don't condone ever the killing of a journalist, even in the jurisdiction of a country that we have a relationship with. The president should be very clear about that. I'm glad that the Senate, the Foreign Relations Committee, in a bipartisan way, has already sent a letter to the president that triggers the use of the so-called Magnitsky Act, which commences an investigation, and then a determination can be made about sanction. But the president needs to be very clear that we don't tolerate this, we value a free press, we value journalists, and we cannot allow even a country that we have a relationship with to get away with this. Finally, I don't trust the Saudis to conduct an independent investigation.
Mr. Barletta, do you think that there is pressure on President Trump to act here, given the fact that there is this, it's been almost called a bromance between himself and MBS?
No, I don't think there's any pressure. I think the president will act appropriately. Let's get to the bottom of it, and I agree with the senator that we cannot count on the Saudis to self-investigate this situation. They've already shown that they've changed the story a number of times. So I think we need to wait and see what the final determination is, see what the president's response is, and then react to whether or not we agree with that or not.
Mr. Casey, on October 10th, the Senate approved the expansion of President Trump's short-term health plans from 3 months to a year. These plans as you obviously know, are much less expensive alternatives to health insurance on the ACA exchanges. And while they do not guarantee coverage to people with pre-existing conditions, they provide at least some coverage to people who can't afford Obamacare. You voted against that expansion, as did all the Democrats. So why can't that vote, why can't your vote be seen as an attempt to save Obamacare at the expense of Americans who cannot afford the skyrocketing premiums of Obamacare?
Jim, I think one thing we have to be very certain about is the Affordable Care Act provided insurance for the first time for 20 million Americans. I want to make sure that every single one of those Americans, including over 1.1 million Pennsylvanians, has health care. But it also did something we don't talk about enough. It provided a range of protections for people who already had insurance but didn't have protections with regard to pre-existing conditions. Women were charged higher rates because insurance companies were allowed to do that. In this instance, the worst thing we could be doing is scaling back those protections. The problem with that legislation is it makes it risky for not just that individual, but for others as well. If we start scaling back on protections, we're going to have more people in the emergency rooms, more people that will delay the care that they should get. We've got to make sure that we protect people that have the health care now. In addition to that, it's critically important in both parties to lower the cost of health care, and I think we can do that in a bipartisan way.
Mr. Barletta, would you have, if you had been a senator at the time, would you have voted for the expansion of President Trump's short-term plans that do not guarantee protection for people with pre-existing conditions?
Let me get this out here early. I would not support anything that doesn't take care of people with pre-existing conditions, regardless of the millions of dollars that have been spent on TV to try to convince people otherwise. And I finally believe I understand why that is. Because the senator would love that this debate is not about Obamacare and what it's cost people here in the United States. In Pennsylvania alone, our premiums have gone up 114%. $718 billion was rated from Medicare to pay for Obamacare. $750 million of taxpayer money went to give health care to illegal aliens. And then they go and punish union workers who have negotiated Cadillac plans, and they're going to be penalized for that. They're going to be penalized because they have a good plan, and if that's not enough, we're going to go after young people, and we're going to penalize them $3,000 if they don't buy health care that they don't want. So of course we want to talk about something that's not an issue, to take the eye off the fact that Obamacare has been a disaster to people in America.
Senator Casey, do you have a response?
I do, Jim. I think it's pretty clear from the record that the congressman voted for legislation in 2017, which would not only have denied or ripped away health care from millions, it would have taken away those protections, not only for pre-existing conditions, but other protections as well. We cannot go back. The law of the land is protect people with pre-existing conditions. We have to maintain that.
Ilya, you have a question for Mr. Barletta.
I do, Mr. Barletta. Last week, President Trump published an opinion column criticizing the Democrats' proposal for a government-funded single-payer healthcare system known sometimes as Medicare for All. Meanwhile, according to a new poll, 52% of Pennsylvanians support adopting a single-payer health insurance plan, while 29% oppose it. Do you support this? And if not, what would you do to protect the health of our communities?
Yeah, first of all, let me just say that I will never support and have never supported denying anybody pre-existing conditions. It's a lie, and if you know, unfortunately, we're gonna continue to debate that. I was a leader in the House in signing on the legislation that would make sure that's done. So we've got to stop scaring people. To answer your question, you know, the last thing I want to do is put our healthcare system in the government hand on steroids. I mean, we saw what a disaster Obamacare is. You know, just the rollout of Obamacare was a disaster. A single payer, how are we going to pay for that? There's no way that we could possibly pay for that and then tell the American people that somehow the government's going to give you better health care. Then you can go out on a free market and allow competition to drive down the price, let you decide what plan you want, let you decide what doctor you want to go to. Obamacare has been a disaster that has cost the American people lot of money.
Ilya, I'll say this. I think there are two issues that most people talk to me about on the road in Pennsylvania when they ask me about health care. They're concerned about maintaining the protections they have and the coverage they have. They also are concerned about cost. So what we should do in the United States Senate, I hope the House would do it as well, is to have a long series of hearings on a whole range of ideas. I support legislation already that would allow folks 55 and up to buy into Medicare. That's a good idea. There are some ideas to use, one bill in particular, put Medicaid on the exchanges because it's very strong health care for families. We have to give people options, but before we go off into a debate about a seismic change in our health care, we need hearings. The first thing we should do, though, is have a bipartisan effort to reduce costs. We had that underway just last year when we were fighting about repeal versus not. We had that underway, and I think we can do that again, bipartisan cost reduction.
But if you could snap your fingers, would you advocate a single-payer plan where everybody got health care coverage and the playing field was equal?
Jim, I need to know a lot more about that idea, and I think that's an idea of that scale warrants lots and lots of hearings. I think a lot of people think they understand what would happen. I think we need to do that. Finally, I'd say with regard to what the congressman said, the legislation he voted for with regard to pre-existing conditions would send it back to the states, allow states to have waivers. So one state could protect people with pre-existing conditions, another state couldn't. We have a national standard. It is now the law of the land to protect people with pre-existing conditions. We should continue that.
I know you want to say something.
So the American Health Care Act is pretty clear. It is clear that nobody with pre-existing conditions could be denied health care. Number two, nobody with pre-existing conditions can be thrown off their health care plan. And number three, nobody with pre-existing conditions can have their premiums raised, period. It's in the law. That covers 93% of the people, and hopefully the senator knows this. Let's not be disingenuous with the people. The 7% that it does not include, we had created a high-risk pool to take care of any premiums that would be increased when they went out on the market, on the exchanges. So we covered everybody with pre-existing conditions. Let's stop this.
We're going to have to leave it there. Shari for Mr. Casey.
Okay, Jim, thank you. Mr. Casey, the latest CDC data shows just last year, at least 5,500 people died of an overdose in Pennsylvania. That's among the highest numbers in the nation. Experts say about 80% of those overdoses were caused by opioid drugs such as prescription painkillers and heroin. There is an effort now to open the state's first so-called safe injection site, a place where people could actually use illicit drugs under medical supervision. Do you support safe injection sites? If not, what are your proposed solutions in addressing the opioid crisis?
Well, just on the question itself, I need to know a lot more about how that will work. So I'm not going to support something like that till I know a lot more about how it would work. Number two is the good news here, and the only good news, and it's literally the only good news, is that the federal government now, both houses, both parties, have come together to try to provide more funding for the opioid crisis, to empower folks at the local level who know how to do this, the treatment professionals, the experts who know how to do this. They're getting more federal money right now. But one of the things we have to stop, and it gets back to these healthcare debates, is stop the decimation of Medicaid, but also the elimination, which is the Republican Party in Congress now wants to eliminate Medicaid expansion, where over 700,000 Pennsylvanians got their health care through Medicaid expansion. The number one payer to provide treatment for the opioid crisis and other substance use disorder problems is Medicaid expansion. We have to protect that for 125,000 Pennsylvanians that are given treatment for substance use disorders, including opioids.
Mr. Barletta.
Yeah, I find it really hard for the senator to come up with a solution to solve this opioid epidemic. He's taken $70,000 from opioid manufacturers, $70,000 from opioid manufacturers. He's taken $1 million from pharmaceutical companies, and he's taken another $1 million from insurance companies. So he's taken over $2 million from pharmaceutical companies and insurance companies. I don't know how objective he's going to be taking that kind of money, so that I have a problem with. As far as Medicaid expansion, here's the difference between the senator and myself. He wants to put more people on Medicaid. I want to get people off Medicaid. I want to get them a job. He wants to expand Medicaid. I want to get people a job. I want to get them off, get them back working again, not put more people on. I don't want more people. First of all, 50% of doctors don't accept Medicaid patients. That's not good health care. So your goal to the people of Pennsylvania is, I'm going to do you a favor, elect me, and I'm going to put more people on Medicaid. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to get you off Medicaid and get you a job.
Mr. Barletta, you really didn't address Shari's question.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Safe injection sites, and
no,
what would you do?
Simple answer, no. I do not support safe injection sites.
And how would you approach the opioid
So
crisis?
I've actually passed 2 bills myself to try to address it. It's going to take everybody. It's not going to be just the federal government. It's going to take local, state, community leaders to address this horrible. Every 20 minutes, a baby is born addicted to opioids. Every 20 minutes. That's a horrible statistic. I had a bill that actually makes sure that when a baby is born addicted to opioids, it's reported, and we put that baby in a safe care plan for that baby, and make sure the mother gets treatment and the baby gets treatment, and then reunite them when they can. Also allows us to use.
We're going to have to move on. Mr. Casey, you have 30 seconds.
Yeah, just to go back to the issue of Medicaid. Medicaid is a program where folks are sometimes working and sometimes not, but it's a critically important program for Pennsylvanians. I hope the Congressman knows that 40% of our kids get their health care through Medicaid, and we should make sure that every one of those children in rural areas and big cities and small towns, as well as half of the people with disabilities, 60% of seniors going to nursing homes. We have to protect Medicaid. It helps all of us in one way or another. Secondly, I'd say if this is a fight about who's getting help from some big interest, I think I'll win that battle. The major pharmaceutical companies...
Excuse me, sir, we've got to move on.
Okay.
So maybe you'll have an opportunity to say what you want later. Mr. Barletta, 2 weeks ago, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change issued a report for the United Nations that claims a worldwide environmental disaster tipping point is 12 years away, and if governments around the world fail to make, quote, rapid, far-reaching and unprecedented changes in all aspects of society, human civilization and our planet faces cataclysm. Do you think the report is credible? How should the United States deal with this threat? And I have to ask you, do you think climate change is man-made?
I believe there is a change in our climate. Well, let me start with that. Whether it's man-made or cyclical, doesn't really matter. If we believe there's a change in our climate, then one, we can't do anything about it if it's cyclical, but what we can do, if it is man-made, if it is, let's make sure we're doing our part, make sure that we're having regulations, reasonable regulations to do our part. Now, if
you're not saying that it is, sir. You're not saying it is man-made.
I don't know if it matters. What matters is that we should do what we can in the event that it is. But here's the risk. If we over-regulate, if we try to do more here in the United States than other countries, we are going to push these jobs out of the United States into countries that have less regulations, that pollute more, that are hurting the planet more. We actually do more damage by over-regulating here in the United States and having these countries go to China or some other country where there are less regulations, where they can pollute more and harm the planet. So let's just say we all agree that our climate is changing. Let's do our part here in the United States, and we should be trying to attract business here, not chase them into these other countries.
Mr. Casey, how should the United States respond to this threat, and do you think climate change is man-made?
Jim, I think the science is clear. Climate change is real, and it is caused by man. We have to take action. This is the threat to human civilization. Everyone knows that now. It's only a question about what we'll do about it. First and foremost, the Obama administration was right to bring forth the Clean Power Plan. We should be supporting that. The administration and the Republican Congress is against that. That's one of the best ways to combat climate change. We should also rejoin the Paris Climate Accords that the President pulled us out of. The United States of America should lead on this. This is a moral crisis, and we don't have to make that old Washington false choice. If you do this on climate, you're going to do this to jobs. We can do both. The American people are smart enough, our scientists are smart enough, and we're smart enough to innovate and to make sure that we're confronting this crisis appropriately. I think this is a mission worthy of a great country.
Ilya, you have a question for Mr. Casey.
Mr. Casey, another caravan is on its way from Central America to the U.S. border, enraging the Trump administration that is now considering resuming family separations as a way to deter asylum-seeking migrants from crossing into the country illegally. Family separation at the border has been described as torture. The administration deadline to reunite families separated at the border passed about 12 weeks ago. What do you think should be done to fix this, and how do you see the future of more than 11 million undocumented immigrants, specifically those thousands that live in this state and have established roots in the community, have children here, and have contributed to society and the economy of Pennsylvania?
Well, first and foremost, Elia, we should not, under any circumstances, be separating children from their parents at the border. Unfortunately, that's where the administration that's the policy they pursued. They seem to want to reinstitute it, as you referred to. And the Congressman and I have a big difference of opinion on this. But it all gets back, I think, to the much broader question of what are we going to do about immigration? At long last, we should come together in a bipartisan way as one American family and fix this broken system. We had a bill that got 68 votes in the United States Senate in 2013. It was comprehensive. And the central feature of it was, in fact, border security, dedicating tens of billions to good border security, hiring more border patrol, making sure that we're using technology to secure the border, but also tackling the other issues like making sure there's a path to citizenship, workers for our economy, and all the rest. We can do this if we do it in a humane and effective manner.
Mr. Barletta.
So they had their opportunity. President Trump tripled the amount of DACA recipients, dreamers, that President Obama wanted to legalize. Triple. But all they had to do for that was to secure the border, agree to securing the border, agree to e-verify, agree to make sure that we don't have another 500,000, 600,000 DACA recipients 5 years from now. So I'm confused how Democrats in Washington could say they care about the dreamers, but they voted against it. They could have tripled the amount. 1.8 million DACA recipients would be legal today if it wasn't for the Democrats who cannot stand the thought of securing the borders. If you think that this caravan now is a problem, let them get in charge again. You'll see people rushing the border. Catch and release. The senator supports catch and release. That's open border policy. You come in here, you get caught, you get released, and you go away.
Mr. Casey, a rebuttal.
Well, first and foremost, my record is very clear on border security. And that's why the 2013 bill is where we should get back to. That was legislation supported by both parties. With regard to the Congressman's assertion that this year was the opportunity this past year was the opportunity to fix the DACA program and to keep the promise to young people. He's right, we should have done that as a Congress. The problem was you had Democrats and Republicans working together. The president pulled the rug out from a bill that would make sure that the DACA problem was solved once and for all, and that we also provided border security dollars. The president rejected it, despite the fact that 8 United States senators who are Republicans voted for it. They did the right thing. The House did the wrong thing.
Do you have something to say?
I don't know if I understood that.
Okay. Well, if you didn't, let's move on.
Okay.
All right. Shari, Mr. Barletta.
Okay, Mr. Barletta, a Quinnipiac University poll released in July found half of Americans believe Donald Trump is a racist. He's accused of discriminating against minorities in his rental properties dating back to the 70s. He refused to denounce white supremacist David Duke. He attacked NFL players for kneeling during the anthem. Civil rights icon and Congressman John Lewis said this about the president: "It makes me sad. It makes me cry. As a nation, we've come so far. I think this president is taking us back to another place." What action steps or legislative measures will you take to ensure inequities in the black and brown communities are acknowledged and eradicated?
Thank you. First, let me, if I can, disagree with the premise that President Trump is a racist. Black unemployment under this president is at an all-time low. Hispanic unemployment is at an all-time low. Hispanic ownership and black ownership, home ownership, is at an all-time high. 4 million Americans are now off of food stamps. That's what matters. His policies are helping everyone. And as far as kneeling for the flag, it's not only blacks that knelt for the flag. And I think that's shameful, to be honest with you. If I can be honest, I think it's shameful to kneel in front of the American flag. I think we should stand for the flag and kneel when we pray, not the other way around. Thank you.
But what would you do, as Shari asked, to ensure equity among races as a U.S. Senator?
I think what we could do is what we're doing. Keep the economy going. This economy has been great for minorities, great for minorities. 4 million people off of food stamps. Black unemployment at an all-time low. Hispanic unemployment at an all-time low. Women's unemployment at a 65-year low. There are more jobs than people who are unemployed. Minorities have done better in the last 2 years under President Trump and the policies that we have today than 8 years under President Obama. Nobody could deny that. There's no metric of statistic that you could tell me when more people are coming off of food stamps, more people are owning homes, more people are getting jobs. Why is that bad?
Mr. Casey.
Shuri, I'll say first and foremost, when it comes to the broader economic picture, the problem with the Congressman's argument is, despite all of that economic data he went through, the problem is too many Americans' wages aren't growing. That's true for African Americans, it's true for a lot of other folks. But what we should do, I think there are probably two words I'd start with regard to what we can do. One is opportunity and the second is investment. We've got to make sure that we're investing in children in the dawn of their lives. This is a bipartisan failure. We should make it a national goal that every child, every single child, reads by the time they get to kindergarten. That's one way to level the playing field, so to speak, no matter what circumstances that child faces. The other thing we should do is make sure that we're investing in folks, their education and the training, and make sure that we give them an opportunity to be able to compete. Sometimes the most important issue for a young entrepreneur or a young business owner who happens to be a minority is whether or not they have an opportunity to get a contract. Those programs work, and we should invest in those opportunities. I know I'm out of time.
Mr. Casey, I think we will all agree on one thing, at least, that our politics and our politicians have rarely, if ever, been more polarized than they are now. Some have said that we are living through a tribal war that threatens our democracy. Do you see yourself as a legislator capable of compromise? And if so, can you please cite a specific issue where you have compromised with the other side in the past and a specific issue where you will do so in the future?
Yeah, Jim, I think you're right about civility. We all need to do more. But in terms of the actual legislation, I've had a number of, I don't have time for a list, but I have had a number of major pieces of legislation that became law where I had to work with the Republican to pass it. Just to give you an example, the President signed into law my career and technical education bill that I worked with Mike Enzi from Wyoming. He's a conservative. We worked together to make sure that we're updating those programs to provide a higher skill level for our workers. I also worked with another Republican senator to get an opioid bill done that relates to helping provide resources to grandparents who are raising a grandchild because of the opioid crisis. So I think my record is pretty clear about working with the other side, but I think even beyond the bills, we have to ask ourselves more often, is there more that we could do? Are there ways that we could work better together? I think that's possible, but I think it's a challenge on both sides.
Mr. Barletta, where have you compromised with the other side in the past? Where in the future will you?
So if I could just, I hate to be a topper here, but it's not really your bill, Mr. Senator. G.T. Thompson, that was a House bill that G.T. Thompson from Pennsylvania, that was the CTE bill, and I actually have language in that bill before you even got it. I negotiated language that would bring employers in the industry to the table. So it's good that you were able to work with our bill there and get your name on that. So that's good. I've joined a bipartisan working group. I saw how partisan Washington is. It's so partisan that some senators said that they were going to vote no, regardless of who President Trump nominated for the Supreme Court. No matter who, without even knowing who the person was, they were voting no. I joined a bipartisan working group when I got there. I belong on it now for 8 years. There's 27 of us, Democrats and Republicans. We meet every Tuesday morning at 8 o'clock in Washington to work on legislation together. I came home and became an example. I worked with Senator John Yadichak, a Democrat, in creating an after-school program in Luzerne County as an example how Democrats and Republicans can work together.
Mr. Casey, you have 30 seconds.
I'll just add another piece of legislation I worked with Senator who now heads the Intelligence Committee, Senator Burr, is the ABLE Act. For the first time, and this passed in 2014, for the first time we have accounts that can be set up for an individual with a disability, especially when they're children, so they can save in a tax-advantaged way over time. The Associated Press called it the most important new law for people with disabilities in 25 years. I'm proud of my efforts to make sure that was bipartisan. Jim, there's so much more we could do. I hope that we can come together, maybe at the end of this year, I hope in 2019, no matter whether I'm there or not, that we come together and focus on infrastructure. Both parties need to be part of an effort to rebuild roads and bridges, bring rural broadband, and bring the country together.
Ilya, for Mr. Barletta.
Yes, Mr. Barletta, you have criticized your opponent for voting for President Obama's stimulus program that increased the deficit. When President Obama left office, the deficit was about $666 billion. 2 years of the Trump presidency will push the deficit to $1 trillion next year. Do you have the same criticisms of the president's economic policies?
So, under President Obama's stimulus and their administration, the national debt went from $10 trillion to over $20 trillion. More debt was created during that administration than every president going back to George Washington. They created more debt under one administration than every president going back to George Washington. So what we're seeing today, actually, in passing the tax cuts, obviously, you're taking in less revenue, but it's getting the economy going. Do you know, this year, even with the tax cuts, we have taken in more revenue this year than any other time with the tax cuts. Because this president understands how to get the economy going. It's not more regulations, it's not higher taxes like they want to do. It's let businesses grow and expand and have more money. It's working. More people are working now than ever before. Why would we want to stop this? This is the greatest economy we have ever seen, and it's under this administration and our policies, not theirs.
Mr. Casey.
Deficit and debt have exploded in just the last year or so under this administration. Part of the driving force behind that explosion is this tax bill that they rammed through. You had a Republican bill rammed through that gave 83% of the benefits to the top 1%. So if you're making more than $730,000, according to the Tax Policy Center, you're doing pretty well. You're getting a huge tax break. It ran up debt so much to give corporations, multinational corporations, permanent tax relief that we're all going to have to pay that debt back. This bill was a corporate special interest giveaway. My opponent supported it along with his party, and it has not done anything to lift wages in America. And that's what should have happened. We should have passed a tax bill that said we're going to give the middle class a huge, substantial tax cut. They didn't do that because they want to give away the store to big corporations and rich people.
Mr. Barletta.
Oh my, it just proves that you don't understand how to get the economy going, and I can understand that when you've spent a career in Washington. Listen, the tax cuts, 90% of the people, of the American people, have seen more money because of the tax cuts. 90% of the people have seen more money because of the tax cuts. A family of four earning $40,000. Now, this is not the rich. This is not top 1%. We'll see a $1,447 tax cut because of our bill. The child tax credit went from $1,000 to $2,000. The standard deduction went up to $24,000, where people who, and 70% of the American people take the standard deduction. The first $24,000 you earn is zero taxes, zero. That's not the top percent. The reason the economy is going today and it's soaring today is because of the tax cuts. You know, 44% of Americans could not afford to pay a $400 emergency right now. They couldn't cover it.
Forgive me. Shari, before your next question, I have a real quick question of both of you. It is clear that the tax cut has increased the deficit. Would you both agree?
Yes.
Okay. Now, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is saying that because of the increasing deficit, it's time to look at entitlements and possibly reducing Social Security and Medicare. You think that's a good thing? Do you think that's reasonable? Do you think that's right? First, Mr. Barletta.
Yes. First of all, understand that by giving people back and having the tax cuts initially, we are going to have less revenue. Mm-hmm. But over the long run, over 10 years, we're going to have more revenue. That's how we're going to pay down our debt. We're going to grow the economy at 4.2%. Remember, President...
But what about cutting entitlements?
I'm going to get to that.
Specifically.
I'm going to get to that.
You only have about 18 seconds.
Okay, well, you took a couple seconds there. Under President Obama, he said we're never going to get above 2%. Okay, what's driving the debt? It's because we have more people taking out Social Security and Medicare because of the baby boomers. So listen, we're going to protect Social Security and Medicare for all seniors and near seniors. Nothing will happen. I'll save you some money, no more commercials. Nothing will happen to senior citizens who are 55 or older. However, all those beautiful young ladies over here, I want to make sure Medicare and Social Security is safe for them. So we're going to have to go to work together and do something about it, not ignore it because we're afraid of a negative political ad like I'm saying, but let's actually try to fix it for them.
Mr. Casey.
Well, first, Jim, this is very clear what Republicans in Congress have done. They jacked up the debt to give this corporate tax giveaway to the tune of about $2 trillion. That's with a T. In order to pay for that, now they're talking, all of a sudden they've discovered that they've created a higher debt and deficit, so they're trying to fill in the gap by cutting Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. Two of those, Medicare and Social Security, are earned benefits. They should be there for the American people. Medicaid, I think it tells us a lot about our values, the people we'll take care of. Look, it's very clear what they're trying to do. They are trying to pay for a big tax cut by cutting programs like Medicare and Medicaid. The congressman's own...
Sir, we got to go.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
I'll get back to it.
Can I...
10 seconds.
Okay, sure.
Really, 10 seconds.
I mentioned this before. What's hurting Medicare? $718 billion was rated by Medicare to pay for Obamacare. Obamacare was the largest tax increase in American history. $718 billion came out of Medicare to pay for Obamacare.
Thank you, sir. We're going to move on. Shari Williams for Mr. Casey.
Yeah, let's stay on this point a little bit more. Mr. Casey, Pennsylvania's unemployment rate is 4.1%. It is the lowest it's been since 2000, but many workers haven't seen their wages budge. That's especially true for workers in the lowest tenth of wage earners. What is your plan to get more money in workers' paychecks? Also, where do you stand on raising the minimum wage?
Number one, we should raise the minimum wage. It hasn't been raised at the national level since 2007. I think that's long overdue. Secondly, with regard to wages, I think it's probably the biggest challenge in the life of most working families, middle-class families, or folks trying to get to the middle class. We have to do something about that. Now, I realize you can't pass one bill or two that will automatically lift wages, other than, of course, a raise for those who make the minimum wage or near that. What we should do in the short term, though, is go back to the drawing board on this tax bill and finally say that this giveaway to the top 1%, 83% of the benefits will go to the top 1%. We should use that revenue. We should say to the top 1%, you're doing fine. We're going to use that revenue to give the middle class, or at least part of that revenue, a substantial tax cut. That's the fastest way to get dollars into the pockets of middle-class families. When you survey families, the biggest worry they have in their life is often paying their bills, saving for retirement, just getting from week to week and month to month. We get help with a substantial middle-class tax cut.
Mr. Barletta.
I hope everyone's listening very closely. We're in the middle of the greatest economy that we've ever seen. If we go back to Democrats' control, it ends. They're already talking about stopping this tax, rolling back the tax cuts. They don't understand. They don't get it. They don't know how to get the economy going. They can't. They don't understand it. This is when wages are going to increase, when there's a competition for workers. I was a businessman. I wasn't in Washington my whole life. I actually signed the front of checks. You know when wages go up? When there's a competition for workers. You know why? Because you don't want your workers to leave. The wages going up will be the next thing we're going to see under the Republicans in charge, because now there's a competition beginning. There's more jobs today than people who are unemployed. So employers are going to begin to increase wages so that they keep those workers. The best thing we could do in Pennsylvania to increase wages and workers, it's what Senator, again, is opposed to, is our energy. Our natural gas. We can become a state among nations in Pennsylvania, a state among nations, because of our energy, because of natural gas and our coal. These are great jobs, pipelines. These are family-sustaining jobs and America's future and Pennsylvania's future. And that's how we're going to keep our children and grandchildren in Pennsylvania so they don't have to leave. It's energy. It's right under our feet. We have a senator in Pennsylvania that opposes that.
Mr. Casey, 30 seconds.
For the record, I don't oppose energy. I'll put that on the record. That's a dramatic statement. We have a great benefit from the extraction of natural gas with regard to jobs and a lesser dependence on foreign oil, and that's substantial. But here again, what we're talking about is something very fundamental. And sometimes you got to make decisions and choose. You can either choose to support a policy that gives extraordinarily wealthy people. By the way, the top 1%, their income, share of national income doubled since Reagan. They don't need a tax cut. We need a middle-class tax cut, which the congressman won't support because he's part of that same crowd that said, oh, pass this tax bill. And the White House promised that wages would go up at least $3,000. On most days, they were saying $4,000. We haven't seen anything close. We've seen a lot of big corporations with stock buybacks get richer. Workers have not benefited. It hasn't had a positive impact on wages. We need a middle-class tax cut. I hope you join me in that.
All right. I'm trying not to be disrespectful. I need you guys to adhere closer to the time limits, please, because we're moving on. We're getting to the end of the debate, and we still have some stuff that we want to cover. Mr. Barletta, it is hard to imagine anything more obvious than that kids should be able to go to school without risking their lives. An organization called Gun Violence Archive says that since 20 students and 6 adults were shot and killed at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Connecticut in 2012, there have been, and these numbers are just brutal, 239 school shootings, 438 people have been shot, 138 have been killed in American schools. What should the federal government do? What could you as a senator do to keep our kids safe in schools?
Well, we should encourage everyone in Washington to sign on and pass my bill. We should take every metal detector that we have in Washington, every metal detector in every federal building, and we should send them to our schools. We go to work every day. There are men and women with machine guns protecting us. There are metal detectors. It's embarrassing the amount of protection we have. When we were shot at the baseball practice, you know what Congress did? In 9 days, they found millions of more dollars to give ourselves even more protection. We can put safety, we could put alarm systems in our homes. It's embarrassing that our children and our teachers will go to school tomorrow unsafe. You cannot get into a federal building and harm any bureaucrat, any federal worker, or ourselves, the amount of protection we have. I said, let's put kids before Congress. Let's take what we have and let's give it to our schools. If you cannot get into our schools, like you cannot get into a federal building, our children will be safe and our teachers will be safe.
Mr. Casey.
Jim, I'm not sure any news event had more of an impact on my thinking about these issues than what happened in December of 2012 in Newtown, Connecticut, the Sandy Hook Elementary School. And it changed the way I view these issues. And I had to make a decision at that point whether to continue to oppose legislation which would change the law with regard to gun violence, or whether I would support common sense measures. We finally had a vote a couple months later in 2013 where we had a vote on a background check bill, which is supported by about 90% of the American people, a vote on the limitation of the magazines, the number of bullets you can shoot at any one time, and third, a ban on the military-style assault weapon. Since that time, we've had votes on denying a terrorist or someone who's suspected to be a terrorist, or we know they're a terrorist, and we don't let them on airplanes. We've also had votes on that as well. There are a series of steps we can take to at least reduce the likelihood that we'll have another Sandy Hook. But unfortunately, as you mentioned, 239 schools, the most recent, most prominent in Parkland, Florida. We need to take action. This should be bipartisan. We need some Republicans to vote for common sense gun measures.
Mr. Barletta, you have 30 seconds.
Yeah, sure. The best way to stop children and teachers from being attacked in the schools is not to let them into school. Why are we going to pick one weapon and think that somehow that does the job? You remember when somebody stuck a bomb in their shoe? Now we take our shoes off to get on an airplane. Next person put a bomb in their underwear. It doesn't matter what they're going to use. Let's keep them out of schools. The safest way, the best way to keep our children and teachers safe, let's not pick one weapon. Let's not let them into schools. It doesn't matter. Federal buildings are protected. Why can't we protect our schools the same way?
Ilya, for Mr. Casey.
Mr. Casey, since the landmark 1973 Roe versus Wade, that case, the Supreme Court has repeatedly upheld that abortion is a fundamental right. President Trump promised to nominate justices who will overturn Roe versus Wade. And with the nomination of Judge Kavanaugh, he has made good on his promise. Now, with conservative Judge Kavanaugh now at the nation's highest court, women's health advocates worry that this could someday be the case and return the debate over abortion to the states. What is your position on legal protection for unborn children from the moment of conception if Roe versus Wade is ever overturned?
Well, I'm a pro-life Democrat. What that means is that I support programs and policies that will help us reduce the number of abortions as well as reduce the number of unwanted pregnancies. My record is not only clear on that, but my record is strong in terms of supporting programs that reduce abortions. Part of that is to make sure that we provide access to, in an affordable way, and preferably in many instances free, access to contraception so you can reduce the number of unwanted pregnancies. But the other thing we should do as a nation is make a pledge to the American people that we're going to work so that every pregnancy is a healthy pregnancy. And if we do both, if we help pregnant women in ways that neither party has done enough of, and we make sure that we have access to contraception and don't prevent organizations like Planned Parenthood, which provides so much support for women's health, that we don't go in the direction Republicans want to do, which is to completely cut off funding for Planned Parenthood. But I think we can, the country can come together on this issue.
Mr. Barletta.
I don't know how, Senator, you could stand here and say that you're a pro-life Democrat. I don't. You have a 100% voting record with NARAL, which is a national abortion rights group. 100%. You have a 70% voting record with Planned Parenthood. In fact, you take money from Planned Parenthood. How can you tell the people, how can you look in that camera and tell the people that you are a pro-life Democrat? You like to say one thing in Pennsylvania to us and go to Washington and do something else. How could you have a 100% voting record with the National Abortion Rights Group and stand here today and look in the camera and tell people you are a pro-life Democrat? I have a 100% voting record for life.
You have 30 seconds.
I get 30 seconds. I'll say it again. We can continue to have fights every year about the issue of abortion, or we can bring the country together to help pregnant women in a substantial way. That's why you have to support Medicaid, because 45% of the babies born in the United States of America have their birth paid for by Medicaid. Medicaid, Congressman, is a pro-life program. I hope you'd support it more aggressively. Second, we should support the Women, Infants, and Children's program. We should make sure that these programs are there for women, so if a woman chooses to bring a child to term, she is going to have the help that she needs.
I think we
can do
Mr.
that
Casey,
as
we have to
one
move
country.
on. Thank you. Shari Williams for Mr. Barletta.
Okay, Mr. Barletta, in April, the Senate Judiciary Committee approved legislation that would protect Special Counsel Robert Mueller from being fired by President Trump. But it was never brought forth before the full body for a vote. Would you vote for legislation to protect Mr. Mueller as he conducts his Russia probe? Why or why not?
I would like to see the completion of this never-ending probe. I mean, it's going on and on and on for years. I don't know how long it's going to take to continue to try to find something. I would like this to come to an end. The American people would like this to come to an end. If Mueller could get to his conclusion, let's have it. The American people are tired of this thing going on forever. The taxpayers are paying for it. Let's find out. If there's something there, let's find out.
Would you vote to protect Mr. Mueller?
Yeah, I would protect. I want to see this come to an end. Let me just say that. I want to see this come to an end. If there's information that they have that I don't, I'm not aware of it. I would like to see this come to an end. I would like Mueller to be there when it comes to an end. But if he's going to go on for another 5 years, I don't think we should keep going until we find something if there's nothing there.
Mr. Casey.
Well, it doesn't sound like a ringing endorsement of Robert Mueller. He's a special counsel. He's been given authority to investigate whether or not there was a relationship between activities of the Trump campaign and Russian interference with the election. There is no question that the Russian Federation interfered with our election. That is certain. The only question is, what are we going to do about it? And part of that is supporting not just Robert Mueller, not just the investigation, but the rule of law and the independence of that investigation. And unfortunately, what you heard was a lot of equivocation from the congressman, like a lot of people in his party who pretend or assert that they are generally supportive, and then they keep talking about get the investigation done. The American people want this investigation to be thorough, and they want to get to the bottom of why the Russian Federation interfered in our election, and secondly, whether there's been obstruction of justice. They want to know that.
Mr. Casey, would you vote to protect the investigation?
Absolutely.
Mr. Barletta, you still haven't answered the question. Would you vote to protect the Russia probe?
Here's what I have to answer this. After 2 years, there is no proof that the Trump campaign colluded with the Russians. None. After 2 years.
Report's not done.
None. The only one that colluded with the Russians has been Hillary Clinton, your friend. That's the only one who's colluded with the Russians.
Mr. Barletta, would you vote to protect the Russia investigation? Yes or no?
To protect the Russian investigation?
Would you vote to protect Mr. Mueller and his investigation from being fired by President Trump or something of that kind?
I'm going to say I wouldn't vote for that. If he's going to go on for another 5 years to try to find something that's not there. This whole investigation was about whether the Trump campaign colluded with the Russians. Now we're talking about a lot of other things that have nothing to do with what was the purpose of that investigation. And it certainly looks like we're trying to find something, even though we're not even looking at what the intent was of that investigation.
So you're taking time. You're taking time from your own closing statement.
Okay.
The answer is no. Thank you very, very much. With that, we will conclude the debate portion of this broadcast. We want to thank you for your participation. I think it was a really good debate. Congressman Barletta and Senator Casey. We're going to take a short break. When we return, the candidates will make their closing statements. Mr. Barletta, your closing statement.
Thank you. About a month and a half ago, I attended the 9/11 ceremony in Shanksville, and I came there after just being told that my 18-month-old grandson was diagnosed with cancer. I was very upset and actually had a conversation with the senator about that and how upset I was. A month and a half later, my brother passes away, which the senator knew about. We buried my brother on a Friday. On Saturday, the senator began running a commercial that mirrored the situation that we are going through with my 18-month-old grandson with cancer. My family was affected. I pleaded to him to please take the ad down. He said that his answer was that votes have consequences and you will be held accountable in November. Certainly didn't seem like he was sorry. The ad is still running today as we speak. My family is still hurt. My grandson still has cancer. My question is, could you tell me why you did that and why you won't take the ad down?
All right, Mr. Casey, your closing statement.
Congressman, if that ad caused you and your family any pain, I apologize for that. And I also apologize to your daughter as well. It was never intended that way. The reason I didn't make the connection between that ad and your grandson was very simple. I was thinking about Stacy Ritter and her story and her daughter's story about pre-existing conditions. It's a major issue in the campaign, but I'm sorry if I caused any pain at all. And I want the people of the state to know that this issue is a major issue in the campaign, whether or not we're going to maintain the protections for pre-existing conditions. This is being litigated in a federal court. The Trump administration has taken the position that the whole law should be unconstitutional. We shouldn't go in that direction. We should maintain the law of the land on pre-existing conditions. Secondly, I hope we can come together, both parties, and support the middle class with a substantial tax break so that middle class families can make ends meet. I'm honored to have this opportunity. Jim, I want to thank you and Channel 6, and I ask for your vote on Election Day.
That concludes our debate, and we want to thank Congressman Barletta, Senator Casey for joining us, and thank you for watching. The general election is November 6th. As you prepare to cast your votes, we invite you to check out voting resources, our voting resources, on our website at 6abc.com. For Shari Williams and Ilya Garcia, I'm Jim Gardner. Goodbye.